Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to It's Good to Talk. It's a podcast. My name is John D. Healy. I got into podcasting because I produced a book for Stoney McGurn, my good friend, called And That's How It All Started. He was born in 1941, so it's his life story. It's all the way from 1941 up to present. Growing up in Ireland, working in New York, driving trucks, working during the civil rights, stuff like that, when he didn't understand why black people had to sleep in the truck and he had to get a motel. It's on audio, it's on video. You can buy it on Amazon. I want to give a special shout out today to my sponsor, Sliffy Van Lines. I have some exciting news for all of you listeners today. A number of months back, I made some predictions on inflation and on the price of oil. I did it 6 months ago, I did it a year ago, and I must say I was pretty spot on. But as of yesterday, the big announcement is here, and it's good news for everyone, all of you listeners. I predicted when the price of oil was $90 a barrel, I kept bringing it down, and now it's at $66 a barrel, $1 off where I want it to be at 65. And today I'm predicting, yes, it's going to go to $55 a barrel. What does that mean for you? It's cheaper Uber, cheaper yellow cab. And yes, moving services will be going really, really low. Purchase manager at Liffey was hugging me and kissing me at 7 o'clock in the morning. I said, what's so excited? He said, the prediction. I said, I didn't say your wife's getting pregnant. No, more important, oil. And oil affects everything. It affects inflation. So good news to all my listeners. The Irish Examiner USA is my favorite paper here in New York City, and Paddy McCarthy is the publisher and editor. And of all the times, of all the weeks and all the months in the year, this is the busiest time for that paper. Catch up on all the events that's happening, because believe it or believe it not, St. Patrick's Day is March 17th. And walking or talking, it's going to be a busy weekend. I always have a special guest on. Today is no exception. His name is Brian Scott Mednick. And he is a writer, publisher. He's produced many books, but he is an expert on one particular individual, an actor, but he's an expert in many things. But today I want to talk to him about Gene Wilder, also known as the guy in the chocolate factory. Brian, you're very welcome.
Thanks for having me, John.
Okay, you can shout good and loud to me.
I will.
Okay, tell me, why did you write a book about Gene Wilder?
Well, I was a strange kid. Growing up, Gene Wilder was basically my hero. Seeing Young Frankenstein in the theater was one of my earliest movie-going memories. And I couldn't have been more than maybe 5 years old, and I loved it, even though I didn't get all the adult humor until much later. But I grew up in the 80s when kids my age, their idols were Madonna and Ralph Macchio and Michael Jackson, and my idol was older than my parents.
Okay.
So the idea for the book came when I was in college at NYU. I had a writing class, and the professor gave us an open-end assignment, write 22 pages on anything. So I thought, this is going to be a breeze. So I wrote about Gene Wilder. And my professor was a biographer himself. And he said, this is terrific. You should turn this into a book. And I thought about it because there had never been a biography written of Gene Wilder, which I found very strange, considering how big he was in the 1970s. So I thought, well, that would be to my advantage. It would be the first Gene Wilder biography. Then I thought, I was busy with college and everything. I thought it would be just too much work. Then a few years later, I started writing a few chapters, and this is pre-internet. So I was drawing on newspaper clippings and magazine articles and TV interviews that I would record. And I was able to put together a few chapters that I spent a year working on. And my goal was to have him cooperate, to have it be an authorized biography. And I was very naive because Gene Wilder was an incredibly private person. So I spent about a month writing a letter to him. He was doing a play in England at the time. And I sent him the chapters. I waited a few months, no response. I sent him a polite follow-up. And he wrote me back, and he didn't like to hurt people's feelings. So he told me that he was glad I was not out to do a hatchet job on him, which I was not. And he said he couldn't cooperate because he was slowly writing his own memoir, and it would be like he was competing against himself or we were competing against each other. So he said, I'm sure you're going to continue anyway. And so it was a very polite letdown, but it turned out he was not working on his own.
Well, I must commend you for making contact with him and the fact that he replied back to you. I mean, I could think of if you were doing something about John Wayne or Robert Mitchum, you'd be looking to get a note back from one of their personal assistants.
Yeah, he actually...
Robert Mitchum might write back to you because he was a school teacher in Gone with the Wind. And then again, John Wayne was in The Quiet Man. He might say nothing or not even write to you. But
Right.
I think you made a good selection. Continue on. Tell us more about your adventure with Gene Wildman.
Yeah, so he did actually, because I know his hand, I knew his handwriting, and he hand wrote the airmail envelope. I figured, well, no one's going to give me interviews, so I just abandoned the project. I wrote him back a nice letter saying, I understand. I said I probably will not proceed with the book, and I said if you need any help with your book, I'd be happy to help out, and that was that. So after a year, I started looking at the chapters, and I thought, this is pretty good, and I put a lot of work into it. So I started to write more chapters, and I actually got some people to give me interviews, some of his colleagues and a few relatives, and a lot of celebrities who he worked with turned me down, either because it was unauthorized or they said even though they worked with him, maybe they just did one film with him and they didn't know
Right.
him well enough to contribute anything. But I was able to get a lot of really interesting material from a genealogist
Mm.
in Milwaukee, where he was from, and she provided me with birth certificates and death certificates and immigration papers from his father and his family coming from Russia, and fascinating stuff. Yeah, I got a lot of great stuff. I got some
Mm.
really great interviews with people like Kelly LeBrock, Arthur Hiller, who directed him and Richard Pryor in Silver Streak and See No Evil, Hear No
Mm.
Evil. So I was able to complete the book. The tough part was getting it published.
Of course, always.
Yeah, because at the
Do you
time he
know
was in
why did he go down a road of more comedy than serious stuff? Like it seemed to be all comedy, comic material. Like there was nothing serious. Like if you take Robert Mitchum in the Ryan's Daughter, he's like a very serious school teacher. Of course, his wife Sarah Miles was a complete flirt. She that's like salt and pepper in terms of personalities. So why comedy for Gene Wildman?
well, Gene Wilder,
Or Wilder, sorry.
that's okay. Growing up, his idols were Sid Caesar and Jerry Lewis.
Okay,
So he wanted to be a comedian. He wanted to be a
okay,
comic. And when he was 16, he saw Lee J. Cobb in the original Broadway production of Death of a Salesman. And he said, that's what I want to be. I want to be a serious dramatic actor. And when he came back to Milwaukee, he did a shortened version of Death of a Salesman for women's clubs and, places like that. But then he realized he wanted to be a comedic actor.
okay,
And he did do a few serious roles. One of the earliest things he did was a TV production, ironically, of Death of a Salesman, where
okay.
he played opposite Lee J. Cobb. He played
Right.
Bernard, which was a small role, and that was not a comic performance. And his first feature was Bonnie and Clyde, which was
Okay.
a very serious film, but he was very funny in it. He was the
Okay.
comic relief.
Sounds like real character. And I know recently Gene Hackman died. Did they ever work together?
Not only did they work together, they were friends. They met on Bonnie and Clyde, which again was Gene Wilder's first film, and they became friends. And they were playing tennis one day, and Gene Hackman asked what he was working on, and Wilder told him about Young Frankenstein, and he said, "Is there something in it for me? Something small? I've not done comedy." So he said, "Actually, there is something." So he went to Mel Brooks, and they cast him as the Blind Hermit, which
Wow.
was just at the time. I think half the audience had no idea it was Gene Hackman because his
Right.
name didn't come up until the end credits, and he stole the entire scene that he was in. He was just absolutely brilliant, and yeah, they were friends. They were friends.
Well, it's very interesting and sad about his death, of course, and his death kind of
Yeah.
resembles some of his character, kind of incognito, I guess, to a degree, if you didn't know him that well. It was good at the Oscars to give him a big accolade recently on his passing. Then tell us other stuff about your friend. I call him your friend because I feel you know so much about him, and you've done so much research on him that it's a lot to endeavor. You could have selected other people that would be easier to do. And then again, the fact that you did it in the 80s without too much help from, the technology, you had to rely on pen and paper. Ironically, my friend Stoney McGurn, from the book I published, he wrote his book with a pencil, a regular pencil. He just preferred to do it that way because if he made a mistake, he was able to use the eraser to rub out a mistake. He's not too good at spelling, and I had to help him with that, which is kind of ironic because I have difficulties myself with spelling words. So going back to your time in the 80s with all of that, it must have been, how many years did it take you to get this together?
I actually started writing it in the 90s. So I would say the idea to write the book was probably about 94 or so, 93, 94, when I was still in college. Yeah, I started writing the book, I think, 95 or 96. I think 95 is when I started working on the chapters, and then a year later is when I picked up. So I spent over 15 years writing it.
Wow.
And more than that, trying to get it published. That was, again, that
That's
was
a lot.
that was the challenge.
That's a lifetime. I forgot
And
to ask you, Brian, do you have siblings yourself that are involved in writing, or was anybody else able to reach out and say, you should do this or you should do that, or, or you should say this or say that in a book form?
I was an only child, and which I didn't need any competition. I was spoiled my whole childhood by my parents.
I'm the youngest of 10, but I know I feel like an only child sometimes because everybody else runs away with everything. If it wasn't for Tony King and Jack Ryan and Marcus Hannick, they're listeners, and they just say, you should have said this and you should have said that. And I'm saying, at least I know they're listening, It mightn't be the most complimentary to someone who's listened to me. So more about the book and the production and getting it published. Like, everything was way more difficult back in the 80s. I mean, there are people writing books now that, faster than to write a letter. And of course, letter writing was big in the 80s and 70s.
Well, I started sending the book to publishers and agents, I guess, mid to late 90s. And I still have the whole pile of rejection letters.
I was about to ask you that question, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not joking when I say I seriously got the nicest rejection letters. I actually had one publisher say, I love Gene Wilder. I love your manuscript. If someone else published it, I would buy it, but we can't do it. And the reasoning was, by the 90s, he was in his 60s. He'd retired from film acting, and they thought he was not a hot property. And back then, they'd have to risk publishing, 5,000 books minimum, maybe. And if it didn't sell, those books are just lying around somewhere.
Yeah.
Now they have publishing on demand, so a publisher doesn't have to take that loss. So basically, when someone buys my book, it's published on demand. It's not, there are not thousands of copies in a factory somewhere. So that's been a great help for writers to get published now, because there are some great independent publishers that they'll take a chance on an unpublished author.
A good friend of mine was a literary agent, Mitch Douglas, and I wrote to him, about what I was doing for Stoney, and he wrote back actually kind of a nice rejection, and he said Stoney should stick more to funny and comedy. But, Stoney and myself, we wanted to get real stories out the way it was. I mean, it's good to be funny and funny peculiar and funny haha. But, back in the day, it's like Stoney liked to write with the pencil and that. Before your time, I assume you're a young man, like people had pen pals before X and Twitter and that. And I only heard recently that people as young as President Trump, he used to like to have pen pals. And you can research this for your research corner. He actually he wrote to President Nixon like a letter, like a pen pal letter. That's worth a fact check for you. So we all come around.
I heard that, actually.
You heard that? Okay. Well, you're a good researcher. I'll give you that. You definitely are. And who knows? Maybe we're all related. On that note, I'm going to call on young Jimmy Grady to sing a song for us today, and it's a song called "Aren't We All Related?"
Oh, my granny had a talent for the genealogy. For before there were computers, she could trace your family tree. You'd call in for a visit, and before you drink your tea, to everyone you know you'd be related. We are all related through marriage or through birth, which either is a blessing or a God Almighty curse, and you can trace the lineage for what it might be worth, but in Ireland sure we are all related. My name it is O'Reilly, I don't know, for my father he was Riley, but his father had an O, for one of them refused the soup, so they were forced to go, so to all the travelling Rileys I'm related. We are all related through marriage or through birth, which either is a blessing or a God Almighty curse, and you can trace the lineage for what it might be worth, but in Ireland sure we are all related. Hush your cousins on the radio, my granddad he would say, For we hope that you'll become a singing star like her someday. Now second, third, or twice removed doesn't matter anyway. To the famous Elmer Shanley I'm related. Ah, we are all related through marriage or through birth, which either is a blessing or a God Almighty curse. And you can trace the lineage for what it might be worth, but in Ireland sure we are all related. Now my husband's second cousin is my second cousin too. But before ancestral thoughts arise, 'tis legal through and through. Now my brother's married to his sister's husband's sister, who, Asher, like I'm trying to say, we're all related. Ah, we are all related through marriage or through birth, which either is a blessing or a God Almighty curse. And you can trace the lineage for what it might be worth, but in Ireland sure we are all related. And if you don't believe me, then try it out someday. Just pick a random stranger, a local or a stray. You'll find that you're related in some peculiar way. And don't forget me in your will, 'cause we're related. Ah, we are all related through marriage or through birth, which either is a blessing or a God Almighty curse. And you can trace the lineage for what it might be worth, but in Ireland sure we are all related.
Okay, Jimmy, thank you very much. I can see why your mother is very proud of you, and I think I'm related to you because I talk, you sing. Thanks, Jimmy. Brian, back to you. Tell me about any other writing that you have, that you did, be it successful or not successful. It's fun to write. It's good to talk. And if my listeners like this, they should subscribe and catch up on more interesting facts and the price of oil.
Sure. Well, I do have a website I've had for quite some time, brianscottmednick.com, which you can check out my other books. I wrote 2 books after the Gene Wilder biography. I wrote a short story collection called Drinking Games, which they say you should write about what you know. So I wrote about drinking in Manhattan. And then I wrote a novel called Unnecessary Headaches, which I think is probably the best thing I've done.
Okay.
And I've been trying unsuccessfully for many years to try to get it made into a film. And
Okay.
I've sent it around and everything, and it's very difficult, but it's a nice little story. I mean, I've had people who've read it, which were my friends basically, say they were very moved by it. And
Yeah, well,
it's a nice little story. It would make a nice film.
Well, I did read your book called The Drinking Games, and I would, I guess, because I seem to be an expert in that. One of my famous young actresses growing up was Shirley Temple, but I soon got over Shirley Temple and I moved on to Arthur Guinness. The Drinking Games, I did read that. The other book you mentioned about the headaches, how many characters are in that, may I ask?
There are basically 3 main characters. It's about, about this secular Jewish family who live in New York City.
Right. It sounds like it could be easily put in some kind of. Would it work on stage like theater?
It's interesting that you say that because I really never thought of it as a stage piece until a year or 2 ago. I met this very famous, very successful Broadway producer at a party, and we happened to be Facebook friends. And I said, we're Facebook friends. And we got to talking and we exchanged cards and everything. And she actually had worked with Gene Wilder in summer stock in the early 60s, which was interesting. So I sent her the Gene Wilder book and I sent her Unnecessary Headaches. And I said, I'd like your opinion. I said, I've been trying to get this Unnecessary Headaches made into a film. Maybe it could be a stage play, And
no, I think so.
You know how the business is. I never heard back from her, unfortunately. But I think it could be a stage piece, but I really think it would work very well as a movie, kind of not to give myself this kind of credit.
No, I understand. You have something, you have a product, and
it's kind of in the vein of Ordinary People, something about a mother, a father, and a son. Yeah. Except these are not wasps. These are Jewish New York.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, there's humor everywhere, but I think on stage is a good place to start, especially if it's 3 characters. I'll put the word out for you because I do have a lot of connections in the world of theatre. Believe it or not, I have friends everywhere, and the friends I don't have, like that song is, I don't remember them. That's the benefit of having grey hair. You forget things you should forget. So let's put up some information about you, Brian, where people can get the books and where they can contact you on your website
Sure.
and delve into more information. And I look forward now to working or helping you put you on the right track and give you some Tylenol or Indidol so you don't get headaches, okay? So your website.
Yeah, the website is brianscottmednick.com, and you can find. I write commentary. The last few years. It's basically been obituaries.
Okay.
I just wrote a big one on Gene Hackman,
Okay.
so I tend to write a lot of obits and some political pieces. And
Okay. Well, two
the book,
things there before
if you
we.
want to buy,
Well,
here's
that's
the
the
book.
book. It looks great.
Yeah,
Yeah, well
it's
done.
available on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, basically anywhere online where you buy books.
That's ironic. We have a lot in common because myself and young Jimmy, you heard singing Jimmy Grady, we did eulogies in funeral homes, for the deceased, obviously. And Jimmy has such a beautiful voice, and I present him so well. They ran out of tissues in the last funeral home we were at, just from crying. So myself and Jimmy is available for eulogies, and if you want to write the story to send the people off, very happily. And on another show, I had Mr. Phelan on, who was producing an Irish made tequila, and there was some great stories there of 40 Irishmen that died helping the Mexicans. I think there was a few drinks involved in that too. And then before that, I had Tommy Moran on from Ireland, and he's a singer-songwriter, and we gave great praise to a radio station called Midwest Radio Station, and they have a show that you would probably love, and it's the death notices. And they just announced the people that died within a 20-mile radius. Sometimes I tune into just by accident, just check and see if my name is there. And everybody seems to die peacefully. And then it seems like there's a mass in the local church. And it seems like the graveyard is adjoining the church. I mean, what a fucking way to go. I mean, that's how I want to go. Like peacefully, near the church, near the bar, near the grave. Like everything has to be convenient. I'm spoiled. I'm more spoiled than you are. So, Brian, good to have you. And we'll keep in touch. I'm enthused about your headaches, pardon the pun. I think that would be a great piece on a stage with three exciting people to give it energy and a bit of zest. So I do sign off in my native language, which is, I'll scale you because it's my first language. Thanks to the Queen of England, I speak English. Now I speak better English than the Queen of England because she's dead. And then we go from there to the European National Anthem. So I'm going to say Slán, which means goodbye, and Sin Scéal means that's a story. Agus Beis Scéal means we'll have another story. So you and I will have another story. Brian, thank you very much for being my guest on
Thanks so
Switch
much.
Talk, and I hope people subscribe. Here goes, Slán Abhaile, Slán go Fóill. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, John. Pleasure.